I'm your host, Jack Jordan Maynor, and we have plenty to discuss in today's podcast. Who said September was a boring month for Formula E? Joining me today is Tobias Bloom from eFormLD, and we also have a special guest in the form of Stuart Garlick from eMotion Formula E. Hello, boys.
Hola.
Hello.
How are you?
How is everyone?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, it's a bright sunny Saturday afternoon. Well, I'm lying, it's cloudy, but I'm ready to go.
Perfect, and thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, Stuart's first time on the podcast, and obviously he's got a great podcast in the eMotion Formula E podcast. So, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. The podcast, if you want to search for it, is known as E-Talking Formula E and Electric Vehicles. It's on Apple, Spotify, and all other podcast vendors.
Perfect. Tobias, regular on this podcast. Thank you so much for coming back on. But I suppose you've got your seat reservation now. I think.
I think so too. Yeah. I think you're not letting me off again.
No. Always on that phone. Right. I think there's so much to talk about. So much has happened since our last podcast in the week that when we did one. So I think I'm just gonna go straight into it, and we'll talk about Mercedes, because Mercedes, they announced it was probably the worst kept secret going. Oh, to be fair, I don't know how many times I say the worst kept secret in Formula E, because I suppose there's tons. But we'll start with Mercedes, because that sort of came first. So we had Stoffel Vandoorne, which everyone was expecting, but then we've got the current Formula 2 points leader in Nick de Vries, also joining Formula E next season. Stuart, what do you think of Nick de Vries coming into the sport?
Well, when I heard that Mercedes were going Dutch, I honestly thought that just meant that they were short of money and were expecting journalists to share the restaurant bill at the launch. It was nice that they gave the seat to Nick de Vries. I feel sorry for Gary Paffett, because he didn't have the best first season, but there were glimpses of promise. There were glimpses of his DTM form, particularly in places like Berlin. And I felt that another season would have really cemented that promise. He's also got lots of experience and is great at giving feedback, according to the team. But from what I've heard, they've kept him on in a kind of reserve stroke ambassadorial role, so that's good for him, obviously. Nick de Vries, though, rapid driver, one of my favourites from the junior formulae. I really like watching him in Formula 2. I believe he's been going great guns in the WEC as well, and I'm looking forward to seeing another young Dutch driver upstaging the older drivers in another form of motorsports. So, yeah, great signing for Mercedes as far as I'm concerned.
I think actually I was discussing this. It was actually a few seasons ago I was talking to a couple of journalists and to drivers, in a sense, was like, Formula 2, which obviously Nick de Vries has currently been in, has been in for a while. And obviously he's leading the standings, as I said, at this current point, with just going into Sochi and Yas Marina. So I always thought, could one day, if that step for Formula 1, because it's so hard to break into Formula 1, I said, would, young drivers who are in Formula 2 think that Formula E could be actual serious option? And maybe with the manufacturers, Tobias, that are coming in, maybe those top line Formula 2 drivers, if they can't get into Formula 1, they normally go into the WEC series, but you could do both now. But, do you think they're taking Formula E more seriously now as a championship that, they actually could build a career in?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not sure if they plan on building a career or having FE in your CV always looks good. And if you perform well in FE, it looks even better. But I think that Nick really thought FE is the next best thing for him to do. He's successful in Formula 2, but can't really seem to find a way into F1 for the lack of sponsorship. I don't know, for the lack of luck, maybe as well, because in F1 most seats are already reserved for other drivers. And he felt if he wanted to develop himself as a driver, FE is the next best thing he could do, or the best choice for him and for his career. Because bear in mind, how old is he? 22? 23?
Around that, yeah. 100%. He's about my age.
Stoffel's 27, so a really young lineup. And both kind of feel that FE is, after F1, the next best series to be in. Which is very interesting and great for the series, obviously. Really interesting. And I just to add to Stuart's point, I think Mercedes does have one of the strongest lineups in FE now. Obviously, Nick de Vries is a rookie and will have to learn, um, but he has experience in Formula E cars. He's been part of the development program for Mercedes, and teams usually, I don't know how many kilometers they collect in testing, but it should be around the distance of one or even 2 seasons that they gather in
Yeah, no,
pre-season testing. So he has experience. He obviously was with Audi in these last few years and has been part of the rookie test in Morocco in 2018 with Audi and 2019 with Envision Virgin Racing. Um, yeah, so he has experience, but will have to learn the racing in FE, if that makes any sense. The one-day format in FE, that's always something new drivers and rookies will have to adapt to. But with Stoffel being his teammate, I don't think there's a better teammate to have for your first year than. Oh, I mean, of course, there are better teammates to have those that have been around for these last 4 and 5 years. But Stoffel is a good teammate to look up to, and yeah, I think Stoffel and Nick will do very good this year.
I think you make a good point in terms of, we always think about, drivers that come in this rookie year and it takes time. And maybe that's why, drivers like Gary Paffett, as you said, Stuart, like, he did do an okay job, but he didn't set the world alight. He wasn't like a Felix Rosenquist who came in, set the world alight. Mitch Evans, who jumped into the sport and was quick and outpaced the season one champion in Nelson Piquet Jr. We had Maxi Gunther, who grew into the series in a stop-start year last year for Dragon because he was taken out for a few races. So I think I think for Nick de Vries to show that obviously it's very likely, I'm not going to try and tempt fate, but it's very likely he'll win the Formula 2 championship. But to real show that he is a driver that's got that innate speed and can just adapt his racing skill to anything. If he can perform well in Formula E next season, I think a lot of people can say Nick de Vries is a quite all-rounded, quite complete driver.
Well, yes, and certainly Gary Paffett, as I say, did a satisfactory job last season. I feel the reason he didn't do better than that is because people assume that DTM and Formula E are, bedfellows in terms of how the cars handle and how the cars race, and superficially that may be true, but there's a lot. The cars are a lot closer to each other in Formula E. The circuits are shorter, and the cars are more difficult to drive, I believe, than DTM cars. And I think that for an older driver who's had a lot of experience of F1 cars, as Gary has, and a lot of experience of well, can't call them touring cars, I guess, silhouette cars with roofs, as DTM cars are, that it's just difficult to transition to Formula E at that stage of your career. Now, Nick de Vries is coming in at the right time of his career, and as Toby said, he is focused on doing well in Formula E first and foremost. Now, of course, Gary would say that he was the same. He would say that he actually binned off all forms of motorsport to focus on Formula E last season, but I think it's easier to do it when you're in your early 20s. And Nick as well is one of a few drivers who've actually taken that approach to their career. Maxi Gunther being the other example. He refused apparently F1 simulator and test driver invitations to focus on doing well in Formula E. So maybe this is the future.
It's interesting. How do we think Mercedes will do then? Because obviously that's a pretty, as we said, Tobias, you said, it's a pretty strong lineup. Stoffel Van Dorn, Nick de Vries, these are drivers that, well, I suppose Stoffel Van Dorn was really good when he was in GP2, Formula 2 equivalent. And Nick de Vries obviously coming, so two F2 champions, effectively, in that car. And you've probably seen so many stories already. Will Mercedes dominate Formula E like they dominate Formula 1? But in reality, it's a lot harder to just come in for a new team and dominate the sport.
Yes, and they do have an all-new powertrain. Last season as HWA, they were using the Venturi powertrain, which was useful only in terms of giving them a benchmark in terms of what a generic Formula E powertrain can do. They of course tested minimally, as they're allowed to, their own powertrain, as have Porsche. So even though they've had that operational experience over the season, which will be very useful, I think, compared to Porsche, literally starting from zero, as they say. I think they will find it difficult to hit the ground running. We might be looking at Mercedes potentially winning races when we get to the European season, would be my prediction.
Ooh.
So it's interesting to think that they might actually win a race, Stuart, because obviously we had Jaguar who came in season 3, and they said it was like a development, like they're going to, they might not win now, but it's all about getting ready, and it was potentially getting ready for season 5. Obviously they had a really strong season in season 4. But do you see Mercedes and Porsche coming in like saying that they need to win, like straight away they need to come in trying to challenge for a win, or do you see them trying to build up their car, establish themselves as a solid team, and push on maybe for future seasons?
Well, this is a question, and I think when you look at how Mercedes have approached Formula One, obviously they took a few seasons to really get going there. I think their first win was Rosberg in China in 2012, their third season. I don't think they'll be looking to wait that long to win in Formula E, and I think the fact that they have such a high-profile driver as Stoffel Vandoorne, well, he's not going to want to mess about into his early 30s with a team that isn't quite competitive. So I think there'll be pressure from all kinds of places for them to win. That aside, I think that operational experience they gained as HWA with the Venturi customer powertrain will serve them well, and we could possibly be looking at not necessarily a win on pace, but a sneaky win after a few crashes in one of the European races.
And post-race penalties and all of that, yeah. Yeah, but I agree. I think the aim for Mercedes has to be winning races. I don't think any team in FE is racing for top 10 positions. All of them want victories. And same applies to the big manufacturers in Mercedes and Porsche. They are in FE to win. Having said that, I don't think they'll be super disappointed if that doesn't happen in the first 3 races of their first season. I don't think they'd be super disappointed if that only happened in their second year. But at the same time, of course, they'd be happy if that happened by the European rounds in the new season. Yeah, but as I say, I don't think the goal for Mercedes should be just being part of Formula E and racing in Formula E. The goal for them should be to win races in Formula E. And yeah, whether that happens in the first year or not, I don't know. We'll have to wait for that and see. But the goal for them surely has to be winning races.
What I think's interesting then is, will Mercedes, because of that year they had as HWA, they actually had a year in the sport, whereas Porsche didn't have that year in the sport, Stuart. Do you think Mercedes have got an advantage on Porsche already, or do you think they're going in pretty much at a level playing field?
Well, as I said, operationally they have got an advantage because that team has worked together mostly for an entire season. They will obviously make changes at the top of management. We've seen that with Ian James, as I called him, the Marvel Netflix Toto Wolff, coming in as team principal. But by the way, I'm still waiting for the third instalment of that viral video series, Coffee with Toto. It's not happened yet. Come on, Mercedes, you know what to do. Release it on Twitter. But yes, to go back to your point, I think that they have got that extra operational experience, and that's going to help them a lot. What they haven't got is any more experience than Porsche of how their car powertrain package actually runs together. They've done plenty of testing, but no more than the maximum amount allowed by the FIA and by Formula E, which is not very much at all. So I think we have to wait until they hit the track in Valencia, and probably after that to work out what the differential between Porsche and Mercedes on pace is. Porsche have got a tough season ahead of them just because Yes, they've probably all worked or mostly worked together on the WEC project, and I think they've been very successful in keeping those employees with the organisation with the promise of being in Formula E. But it's an entirely new package, and they've actually owned the fact that they're starting from zero and made it their slogan. So I think they've very cleverly pushed the emphasis onto seasons after this one and made us believe this is a transitional year. Mercedes aren't saying any of that, and they seem more confident that they have what could be a winning package.
I think we've covered Mercedes for a bit. I think we've had quite a few driver moves and driver transfers moving across over the last week. So I'm going to go to Dragon, because Dragon have picked a driver that has actually driven a Formula E car well. I say he's been driving. He's driving it in testing for Audi in Nico Müller, but obviously he's still a rookie. But he is a driver, Tobias, that does have a lot of Formula E experience.
Absolutely, yeah. He's been key in developing not only this year's Audi, but the two generations of the Audi cars before. Nico has been part of the Audi squad forever, and he's been very successful with them in DTM. And he'll do well. He saw his opportunity at Dragon. He was always hoping for maybe taking the second Audi seat alongside Lucas di Grassi. But as soon as they re-signed Daniel Abt for the new year, that door closed for him, and he decided he didn't want to be playing second fiddle anymore, and decided to get a seat in Formula E. And the only option he had, or one of the only options he had, was moving to Dragon. So yeah, I think it's a thing of him really, really wanting to compete in Formula E after being part of the FE bubble for such a long time. And I understand that if you are developing a car and only race it in testing, you don't even race it, you just drive it in testing. And as a race driver, you of course want to compete against others. And I can fully understand him really, really wanting to race Formula E now. And that's why I moved to Dragon. Interesting move, because by the look of things, remember, Dragon wasn't the best of teams last season, and it sadly doesn't seem. I'm happy to be convinced of the opposing argument thing, but it doesn't look like Dragon will be fantastic this year. So an interesting move for him. But as I say, he really wanted to race in Formula E, and that's what he's doing now.
Do you think, actually, there's always this talk about loaning drivers. I'm not saying that maybe Nico Müller's been loaned by Audi to Dragon, but, Stuart, when you think of Daniel Abt, Daniel Abt over the last 2 seasons has really been under pressure to sort of have that seat for the following year. And, earlier in the season, he was like, it's not in his hands, but he got the seat at Audi. Now, obviously, Nico Müller was knocking on the door. So if Nico Müller can go to Dragon and actually put up a good performance and show what he's capable of, will you think that will put more pressure on Daniel Abt to actually perform? Because maybe Nico Müller could be fast-tracked into that Audi next season.
Well, I actually wrote an article about this. You can find it on medium.com/e-motion, getting in that plug. But Daniel Abt is under a lot of pressure this season. He's ironically pushed up that pressure a lot on himself by saying he would retire if he didn't get the deal this season, which was an exclusive, I think, plugged by published by Rob Watts on E-Racing magazine. And by saying that, he's actually made this into a bit of a make or break year in some ways. Mm-hmm. He's from what I can tell, a super open guy and a super decent guy who the team like and or seem to like, and but also someone who has this vast hinterland of other interests outside of being a racing driver, which is kind of unusual these days, given how drivers are brought from the cradle into karts, into race cars, and are not given that much chance to develop their personalities outside of the track. But, you know, anyone who watches Daniel's YouTube channel will know he's a really interesting guy in front of a camera as well. And so basically, if he left the sport, there would be many things that he could do and that he would probably enjoy. But he's still a Formula E driver. That's still his emphasis right now. And I think he's got to look at getting a win this season, just to stay in the squad. That's a heck of a lot of pressure on somebody. Nico Muller is very well known and very liked by Audi Sports, and I honestly think he was in the box seats for that drive for much of the second half of last season. It looks like somebody right at the top made the final decision to go with Daniel because he gets on well with Lucas, he's a known quantity, and he's someone who's driven well for them. And, well, people forget he was in the championship conversation up until the last round of races in New York. So he's not done badly, but the question was, by potentially replacing Daniel Abt with Nico Muller, are you just slotting out one good driver for another good driver, or is Nico Muller an outstanding driver in single-seaters in Formula E? Now, we know he's an outstanding DTM driver because he's been on it all season, and he's been challenging René Rast right up until the last round where René won the championship. Can he transfer that form to Formula E? Well, he has done in testing, but racing is a different quantity. By him joining Dragon, and it doesn't seem to be a straightforward loan arrangement, but I don't think he would have gone to Dragon unless he'd had some sort of unwritten or even written promise that he will be in contention for the Audi drive the following season. Let's look at it at the end of this season, but I think he will do very well, and I think he could be in contention in Season 7 for the Audi drive.
Could you say that it's maybe, Tobias, the same for Brendon Hartley? Because Brendon Hartley, obviously Porsche driver.
I was about to say the same.
You've got Neil Yanni and Andre Lotterer. Now, Andre Lotterer is obviously, he's getting on a bit. Obviously, you know, maybe Formula E cars aren't as they're still demanding to drive, but maybe not as physically demanding to drive as other sort of race cars. But again, if Brendon was to perform well and maybe Neil or Andre doesn't, you know, could Brendon be trying to fast track himself into the Porsche?
Maybe. I was about to say the same. Dragon kind of is the new Volkswagen B team now. Audi has drivers in there, Porsche has drivers in there. Yeah, it's only a matter of time until we have Lamborghini, for example, having drivers in Dragon and preparing them for their work century. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a different thing with Brendon though, because he doesn't seem to be or too attached to Porsche anymore. Nico is an Audi driver, and through, he's an Audi driver. And I don't quite have the same impression with Brendon Hartley. His chance at Porsche Formula E probably was one of his last chances to stay with the team. He's racing the World Endurance Series with Toyota, and now he's racing with a privateer team in Formula E. I don't know, Stuart, have you heard something about him maybe, or his contract maybe expiring by the end of the year? Because that seems like a possibility.
Well, look, I was initially surprised when Brendon Hartley joined Dragon because that was, I think, before they announced Lotterer for the Porsche drive, or no, it wasn't.
No, it was just after.
It was just after, but I was pretty sure that when they announced Lotterer for the Porsche drive, that Formula E would be considered to be a closed book by Brendon, and he would be focusing on the WEC, which anyway, at that stage, had at least 2 calendar clashes. When he then joined Dragon, it was surprising to me, but also I thought, what an ace driver lineup Dragon is beginning to get, and which they've now. I mean, they've got 2 outstanding pedalers, and they really need to make use of that.
Absolutely.
But Yeah, it's a difficult one. He is still officially Porsche's test and reserve driver,
Mm,
and
that's
so if one of their drivers is indisposed in one of the races, he will at least officially come in. The issue is, and you're right on this, Toby, whether actually he's on their radar. I think a lot, again, depends on how quick he can prove to be in an electric race car, which handles totally differently to most of the things he's driven so far in his career. The other thing is Andre Lotterer is one of the drivers who's put himself on the list to be in the pool for Extreme E. Now that doesn't mean he's going to be driving. That just means he's one of the interested parties, and that teams can approach anyone in the pool and see if they're interested in driving for that team. That's why, for example, Sebastian Ogier is on the list. He's not necessarily binning off WRC at that point, but he's saying, look, ask me, I might be interested.
Yeah.
That's the impression I get anyway. So Lotterer at that stage will be 39 or 40. He will be the right age to try something new, and maybe being on that Extreme E boat will be the right thing for him at that point.
Sort of a thing you do in your midlife crisis. Reinventing yourself. Now I'm doing rallying.
Go to the Greenland and the rainforest and the Arctic Circle.
Reinventing yourself like the David Bowie of motorsport.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant! Right then, and I suppose to talk about the last worst kept secret in Formula E. Was Antonio Felix da Costa finally reuniting with Mark Preston at Tech Cheetah for next season, joining obviously champion Jean-Eric Vergne. I think this is really interesting, and it could turn out da Costa being probably one of the most significant summer signings, because in this whole Formula E driver transfer moves, because Andre Lotterer did a good job to Vergne and was a good opponent, you could say. I think da Costa is going to go there, and I reckon, two former, Red Bull drivers, in a sense, or two Red Bull Academy graduates. I really think da Costa can take and really push Jean-Eric Vergne and maybe cause Jean-Eric Vergne to maybe crack a little bit this season. What do you think, Tobias?
Not sure if you can crack Jean-Eric Vergne unless you're Lucas di Grassi or someone of that sort. Of course, Antonio is a fantastic driver, and he is arguably one of the best in Formula E right now. But I don't really see the possibility for him sort of shining and being the new star at a Cheetah. I hope so, of course, because he's a good driver. But it always seemed to me like the Cheetah is Team Jeff, just like Virgin has always been Team Bert, and that's totally fine. But it sort of feels like Antonio is the second driver already at DS, and we've not even entered.
Interesting.
And at least to me, it feels like he's the second driver.
For me, him going back to Mark Preston, obviously, that first win in Amla Naguri back in Buenos Aires in season 1, and yes, maybe the team personnel have changed since the Amla Naguri days, but Mark Preston's still there. So I think that's crucial one for da Costa, going back to a team where, a team that was his. Obviously, it's changed, but to have the same team principle that you started the sport with, I don't think Mark Preston will go into race 1 in Saudi Arabia saying, okay, Jean-Eric Vergne's my champion and da Costa's my number 2. I really think da Costa could, and I think for me the only weakness I can see in Vergne, Stuart, is if you put him under pressure, if you put Vergne under pressure, especially in qualifying, if you say da Costa does the lap first or is in an earlier group, depending on how, and he sets the time and Vergne doesn't meet it in one race, I think that's where Vergne sort of begins to curtail and his performances become a bit more inconsistent. We saw that, some way through the middle of season 3, season 4 time in his championship push, but ever since he's become champion, obviously last season he was super consistent, but if he can get that pressure, if Da Costa can get under his skin a little bit, I think maybe we might see Jean-Eric Vergne not be that consistent driver he's become in Formula E.
The sportsman I would most compare to Jean-Eric Vergne is probably Novak Djokovic, in that they both became the best in their sport, in Djokovic's case for a time, but still in the middle of their careers, rather than in the early part when most hyped drivers become the best. I think it's given Jev a lot of perspective in his life that he wouldn't otherwise have got if he were a Max Verstappen type talent who just came blazing through at age 19 or 20. But it also means that he's got the kind of racecraft that you build up over the course of your career, and the kind of perspective and experience on life that you build up over the course of your career. Where Cheetah needs support is if, as happened in most of the first, I think, 4 or 5 races of season 5, Jev is caught up in incidents of his own making or of other people's making, or he's just not at the races for whatever reason. And I think the concern with Andre Lotterer was that while he'd worked incredibly bloody hard to get on the bumper of Jev, he was not there consistently. There was always the concern that he might fudge up qualifying, or that he might get involved in a needless incident with another driver in the middle of a race. So. And I think Andre enjoys scrapping away in the middle of the pack and getting a surprise second or third. That's not really what DS to Cheetah need. They need somebody who's got the outright pace to be, either right on the diffuser of Jean-Eric Vergne or in front of him. I don't think there are team orders. I think if Vergne was, say, 30 points ahead with 3 races to go, there certainly would be, and that would be logical for me. But I think Antonio Felix da Costa has not come into the team as anything other than an equal number 1, and it's going to be fascinating to see how he does.
Yeah, in any case, with Jeff and Antonio being the 2 drivers for DS to Cheetah, and them having won the team's title in 2 consecutive years, or no, not the team's title, the driver's title, and now the reigning team's champion for the first time in their history. We have to have DS to Cheetah on our cards, and there's no way that Cheetah won't be a title contender this year with these 2 drivers.
No, 100%. I think it's theirs to lose. They have to be the favourite coming in. I know it's really difficult saying, a favourite in Formula E because it's so close and it's so tight and it's so unpredictable, but I think they've established themselves as the team to beat now in Formula E.
They've come a long way, haven't they? I remember when they first joined FE and mocked up qualifying in Morocco, Superpole, where Jeff was released by his pit crew and then ended up at a red pit exit light and couldn't start his lap.
I remember that.
They've come a long way since that. Yeah. So we have to. Yeah. I realise DS to Cheetah is going to be again one of the teams to beat.
So, moving on then. So that wraps up really all the driver moves that happened right at the end of September, when we called it in the last podcast a boring month for Formula E, and then Formula E come out and just, tell us that we're wrong again. But then, if that wasn't enough, we've got a new city on the calendar for season 6, just jumping in, Jakarta in Indonesia on the June 6th. What did we think? Obviously, it's been a long time coming. There's been a lot of reports about potentially wanting a race in season 6, but maybe it might be in season 7 and so forth. But it's coming in season 6. So what's our initial indications?
Well, I try to deliver these things in a compliment sandwich. So Jakarta is a massive population centre. It's a city that is threatened by climate change in a very serious way. They're looking at actually moving government buildings and a lot of businesses away from
Yeah.
Jakarta because I believe it's becoming hazardous to actually live and work there. So it's exactly the sort of place that a form of motorsport with any environmental agenda should be, particularly Formula E. On the other hand, I am disappointed that there is no December date on the Formula E calendar, and particularly I'm disappointed at the loss of Marrakesh, because that was a race I very much enjoyed watching. It was a race that was pretty universally loved by everyone who had to go there, except for one driver who apparently said, "I'm bored with Tagine." If you're bored with Tagine, you're bored with life. I'm sorry. And so Marrakesh, losing that December slot, it's a problem for Formula E, and it's a problem for content creators like you and me, I think, trying to keep interest up in a sport that has an 8-week break between races, because after they leave Adiria on November 23rd, I think it is, the next one is the middle of January in Santiago. Yep. As other people have pointed out, it's a tricky time to schedule races anyway, December, because the Christmas break makes it logistically hard. But it's a shame that we've lost Marrakesh. Saying that, Jakarta's a great addition. Supposedly, they were so enthusiastic about having a race in 2020 that they were willing to put all kinds of incentives Formula E's way. And I think a form of challenger motorsport like Formula E cannot afford to say no to cities and venues and organisers that would absolutely love to have them involved in something, because you've got to keep and bottle that enthusiasm around the sport, because we're currently in a boom time for Formula E, but we might not always have those boom times, and we have to really remember who's enthusiastic.
I really want to pick up on your point there, because it's not about the point about the calendar dates and obviously the massive gap, because Formula E have done this before and they've done it quite a number of times, and I suppose you could say Formula E are shooting themselves in the foot, because it is true, when you've got the race in November, you've got 2 races, but then you have to wait so long. It's like an 8-week gap, and that's like half of the off season where we've just had a Formula, and you want to get the season started, but you're not getting the season started, if that makes sense. You're sort of like this one odd race there, and then all of a sudden, it's like the season really should just start in January and have Santiago and just run as a 2019 calendar season, rather than just going over these 2 years. Because, one, we don't race much in the previous, the year that we exit and we go into the new year, so 19 into 20, if that makes more sense. So, I don't know, maybe Tobias, why do you think, they still feel the need to have these long gaps?
I don't think they feel the need to have these long gaps. There's just no other way for them to organize the calendar logistically. I'm sure FE would prefer to have a nice kind of bow of suspense, and have 3-week breaks between the races and 4-week breaks maybe, but certainly not kind of building up to Adiria and then having 2 more months of nothingness. And that'll be difficult. It'll be difficult to keep the suspense up, and I'm not sure they really want that.
Those 2 races in Adiria need to be amazing, so we can talk about them for 8 weeks. They need to be top dollar.
I don't think FE wants that as well. It's just a matter of them, not having found a different or a better solution. Remember, we were talking about the Christmas race 2 days before Christmas Eve, in Saudi. That once was a possibility, but of course, all the race drivers and team staff, they have families as well. And 2 days before Christmas, you certainly don't want to be working in Saudi Arabia, and then returning just before the time you're supposed, or kind of switching off That's the time of the year you usually switch off and yeah, take a break for once. And so that didn't happen, the Christmas race. And now the first two races moved to November, and we'll have to wait for 8 weeks. Not ideal, but I don't think FE wanted that to happen as well. It did.
I suppose we've lived through it once or twice before. We can live through it again.
Yep. Because that happened before, remember?
Yep.
Pretty much seasons 2 to 4.
Yeah, they had that big massive
Yeah.
gap. Right then, so what I want to talk about now is, we were talking about this person before, but Pascal Wehrlein. What I find interesting with Pascal is that obviously he came into Formula E and he was one of those rookies who was super quick straight away, took to the series like a house on fire, like was able to challenge for wins, as you said, like in Mexico where he just missed out by like 10 feet. So I think he's definitely a driver that, if you sitting over years of watching Pascal Wehrlein, I think you definitely want in your Formula E car, because he's going to do something that's quick. But the problem is, if he does end up at Mahindra again, and I worry for Mahindra, because Mahindra have been doing amazing things, and what Dilbag Gill has done with that side has been fantastic. But when you've got Mercedes, Jaguar, Porsche, Audi, Nissan, that's 6 teams, that's 12 spots straight away with 2 cars. Mahindra are only a small manufacturer, and obviously they've been in the season from season 1, but I don't know if they'll have the budgets to, end up still being able to compete with the likes of Audi, Mercedes and Porsche in the future. So then drivers like Pascal Wehrlein might end up being succumbed to the midfield, and obviously, as you said, with like the Europa League, Champions League analogy, he might not be happy with that. So it might be for Pascal Tobias another year where he has to show himself, and just in case a Mercedes driver, a Porsche driver, an Audi driver, a Nissan driver, any one of those drivers in one of those top manufacturers does not perform, that he could be one of those that could jump straight in.
Absolutely, yeah. But that applies to any driver on the FE grid. I think if you are racing in Formula E with so many manufacturers in the series, you're always looking to prove yourself. And that's what I said before we started recording about Nico Hülkenberg in F1. He hasn't created too many opportunities for himself to find a new seat. And that's what FE drivers have to do. Because in case some manufacturer loses a driver or wishes to replace a driver, you want to be on their radar, and you want to, always prove yourself. And just in case you get the opportunity with Mercedes or whoever it may be, so that you can immediately start negotiating or just talking friendly to your possible future employers. That applies to Pascal, but that also applies to any driver in FE. You're always looking to prove yourself in case you may get the chance to move up to one of the big guns, being maybe to Cheetah, Audi, and BMW. Just what Max Günther did. He proved himself in Dragon, at Dragon, and look where he is now. Works driver for BMW.
And if I can just clarify something, Jack, you mentioned Mahindra as a small manufacturer. It's a relatively small Formula E team, but it's backed by an absolutely massive manufacturer. Now, I think the issue here is somebody of the quality and experience of Pascal Wehrlein. He won the DTM championship, I believe, in his first season. Correct me if I'm wrong, Toby, but
I'm the German. I have to know about DTM. Jesus, sorry. I'll look it up. Give me a
all right.
second.
I know he was 20 when he won the title anyway. But someone of his obvious quality should be in a position where his car allows him to win races. The Mahindra fell back over the course of last season, very much like the Venturi, and I don't think he or his management will be accepting another season like that. So I don't necessarily think they should either. So it's kind of down to Mahindra, who are going through troubles themselves, if you believe Sam Smith from eRacing 365. there is the possibility that the Spanish contractors who they used for much of their engineering team might be moving over to a reconstituted Neo team, potentially. As I say, this is not my information, this is Sam Smith's, so you have to ask him if it's correct, but I usually believe what he writes. If that's so, then they've got some recruitment to do, and that might set back the performance of the car a little bit as well.
I think they've done wonders. I think they were an underdog story, Mahindra. They were and speaking to Dilbag Gill, a lot of times, and he knew that they were the underdog. They knew they wouldn't be able to compete, financially with the likes of Audi, DS. But they wanted to get the best out of their car and maximise their package, which you could argue that they've done. But I think Mahindra are worried about this as well. And obviously, I think it was Campos Racing that they teamed up with earlier in like season 2, season 3, which is obviously Spanish. And I think they knew that, season 3 and season 4, when they were winning races with Felix Rosenquist, and they were enjoying those times because I think they knew those times could quickly come to an end. And so I think they were the underdog story in Formula E, and I think they were the fans' team, in a sense, like the people's team, where I think everyone likes seeing Mahindra do well and see how they do. But I just worry for them now because, as I said, and Dilbag has said it himself, like they're worried about financially being able to innovate, to come up with powertrain ideas that will match Mercedes, will match Nissan and Porsche and DS and Jaguar and all these other magnificent names that are in this series. So I just feel for Mahindra that chance of them winning again is a long way away or may never happen again.
I see them winning again, and I do.
You do?
Yeah.
Good. I hope so. But you can also see, I see how, why they're also sort of worried that, they might not be able to, or they might not have the money to compete if Formula E. I know there might be some cost cap things and things are being kept similar with, engineering and the innovation, but, the more people you can fund into it, which Mercedes might do and Porsche might do and so forth, Mahindra might not be able to keep up.
Pascal Wehrlein won in his third year in DTM. He joined DTM in 2013 and was last, 22nd and last. And then he joined HWA, and in his second year, 2015, that was HWA, he won DTM, and then moved on to Manor in F1.
Well, thank you, Toby, and I'm sorry for assuming that you would be a DTM expert. I just knew from your tweets that you watched most of motorsport, so I thought I'd throw it your way. Apologies.
No worries, man.
Right then, I think that pretty much wraps it up for this week. Thank you so much, Stuart, for coming on. Really, your insight has been amazing.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to be on, and it's actually so nice and kind of a different kind of pressure to be asked questions rather than asking them. I've got to try this more.
And Tobias, as ever.
Thank you. Thank you
so
for having me on once again.
Perfect. Thank you also to everyone who's listened to the podcast. If you're really enjoying the podcast, we'd love the subscriptions on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, all the other places where you can get us, Google, Spotify. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can, but there's no obligation. But thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you very soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.